Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 443, I Tie My Hat, I Crease My Shawl. Now, the other collector of Emily's poetry that's of great importance, Franklin, has had some interesting debate about some of the lines of this poem. And in fact, there's some discussion about poem 1712 as it relates specifically to the publishing of this poem in 1712. I'm going to let you do much of that research on your own. What we will say, though, about this poem is it's another survival poem. It is possible, I don't know, we've had this conversation a number of times already, that Emily may be the most psychological poet that we've read, other than, we would say, possibly Dante himself. Emily, we're not going to argue that her understanding of the psyche is always completely what we today would call, fit or wholesome or healthy. And yet, and we'll see it even in this poem, where she's going to argue for a certain kind of repression of certain negative feelings. And yet, I don't know that we've ever read a poet who is so much focused on trying to understand her own psychic states. It's quite remarkable. In many ways, we're back to poem 419. I mean, just to prove my point. Do you guys remember when we did 419 and it read like this for us? And again, we've already done this study, and our assumptions are that you've worked with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. We grow accustomed to the dark when light is put away, as when the neighbor holds the lamp to witness her goodbye. A moment, we uncertain step for newness of the night, then fit our vision to the dark and meet the road erect. And so of larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain when not a moon disclose a sign or star come out within, the bravest grope a little and sometimes hit a tree directly in the forehead. But as they learn to see, either the darkness alters or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight, and life steps almost straight. Of course, the key word when we did that poem is the word almost, and here we're going to get another almost poem. Our assumptions are as well that you've read with us already the preceding 142 poems. We just finished with 142, God Made a Little Jensen, where, if you've read those earlier poems, you can place this poem in that company of other, what we call survivor poems, right? In some ways, this poem is another theodicy, the question of pain and suffering, how to handle a situation that is in some ways traumatic, we might say. Now, there is a scholar named Porter who has said it this way, quote, living in the aftermath, perhaps Emily's most crucial poetic concern, end quote. Emily had to perform lots of daily duties, and this is a poem where we'll get to hear that. And some have called it Emily's double life. She says it this way, I tie my hat, I crease my shawl, life's little duties do precisely as the very least were infinite to me. I put new blossoms in the glass and throw the old away. I push a petal from my gown that anchored there. I weigh the time 'twill be till 6 o'clock. I have so much to do, and yet existence some way back stopped, struck my ticking through. We cannot put ourselves away. As a completed man or woman, when the errand's done, we came to flash upon there may be miles on miles of naught, of action sicker far. To simulate is stinging work, to cover what we are from science and from surgery, to telescopic eyes, to bear on us unshaded for their sake, not for ours. 'Twould start then, we could tremble, but since we got a bomb and held it in our bosom, nay, hold it, it is calm. Therefore, we do life's labor, though life's reward be done, with scrupulous exactness, to hold our senses on. The only way that we can hold it together sometimes is to just keep going. Notice the daily duties. She'll call them life's little duties. You'll remember we've said this a number of times. She uses the word little in 172 poems. She loves this word. I tie my hat, I crease my shawl. Of course, her garments, we've seen this a number of times. Emily ultimately wearing only white for much of the end of her life. Life's little duties do And then I think the key word of this poem is this word, precisely. In other words, there's an exactness, a preciseness that Emily will say, this is how I get through. I'm very precise. And the poem itself will outline these preciseness, these kinds of precise activities. As the very least were infinite to me, concentrating on the little things. Notice all of the eyes. There's 6 of them here. I put new blossoms in the glass and throw the old away. It's an interesting metaphor, right? I push a petal from my gown that anchored there. I weigh the time 'twill be till 6 o'clock. In other words, I measure through my day. I have so much to do. There, you know, the day, the household duties. And yet, now notice the shift here. We'll not see any more eyes. Now we'll see 10 we or us's, right? And yet, existence some way back stopped. Now again, this brilliant, like a clock, struck my ticking through. And then she says it, we cannot put ourself away. It's a brilliant, I mean, in other words, everywhere you go, there you are, as somebody has said it, right? We cannot put ourselves away as a completed man or woman. When the errand's done, we come to flash upon there may be miles on miles of naught. I mean, we can't read a line like that without thinking, of course, of Dante and Inferno especially. And you'll remember by Inferno 24, Dante the Pilgrim is so tired. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. You can go back and write it to ground if you want to be reminded. He's so tired, and he tells Virgil, his guide, I'm done. And what is it Virgil says in 24, Canto 24 of Inferno? Up on your feet. This is no time to tire. The man who lies asleep will never wake in fame, and his desire drift past him like ripples on a stream. She says, miles and miles of naught. Of action, sicker far. To simulate is stinging work. You hear all these S sounds here. To cover what we are from science and from surgery. And then, of course, all of the telescopic eyes. 2 telescopic eyes, people watching. To bear on us unshaded. Right? In other words, trying to figure out what's going on with us. And then she'll say it. For their sake. Not for ours. Right? In other words, she says, I get through all of this, not just for me, but really for those around me. And then she'll say it. 'Twould start them, right? Shock them if they really knew what I'm going through. We could tremble, back to poem 136, you remember shadows tremble so. We could tremble, but since we got a bomb and held it in our bosom, nay, hold it. It is calm. Notice this line to work with hold our senses on, right? Therefore, we do life's labor. Sounding very much like she's borrowing from Shakespeare, no doubt, right? This is, in some ways, the to be or not to be speech, isn't it, of Hamlet 3, right? Though life's reward be done with scrupulous, again, back to the word precise, exactness to hold our senses on. Now, when we get to poem 772, we'll hear that line, all is the price of all. And it's just pure Emily. This is Emily's idea about how you get through a really rough situation. One scholar has suggested that rage must be, for Emily, rage must be repressed if the sufferer is to stay sane. Now, whether that's, again, healthy psychological views given our views today, I'll leave it to you to debate. But it is true that she's making the argument, sometimes you just got to keep going. You cannot let others around you know the pain, the suffering that you're kind of working through. At 2b, the shift in this poem is fascinating. Of course, the word choices here, especially of precise. But the shift is amazing. So she starts out by talking about herself. She ends up talking about all of us. We somehow feel we can identify with the challenges of this poem. At 3a, well, I cannot read a poem like this and not think of our Dante, and as we said, especially Inferno, and thereby 24, Canto 24. Dante is so, the pilgrim is so tired, right? So ready to quit, ready to give up. Of course, we can think about Nietzsche's passage, that which does not destroy me makes me stronger, obviously. That comes to mind here as well. We have said that Emily's theodicy is often, when bad things happen, to not ask, why did this happen to me? But rather, why did this happen for me? We're not celebrating the pain or suffering of Emily, but rather we're saying there's some kind of propaedeutic. it's instructional. I can find a way to get through all of this. Finally, at 3B, to own a poem like this, what was a time when you had to be precise to get through, to remain sane? I hope Emily is helping you and challenging you at the same time. Thank you.